Welcome. I'm your host, William Malouf, and sitting with me is Cristina Mittermeier. She is an esteemed writer, photographer, and conservationist. In 2005, she founded the International League of Conservation Photographers in order to amplify the voice of those who are trying to bring awareness to environmental and cultural issues. And then in 2015, she and her colleague Paul Nicklin established Sea Legacy, a nonprofit, in order to bring light to issues affecting the world's oceans. She has been the recipient of awards, including the Smithsonian Photographer of the Year, National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, and was recognized as one of the top 40 most influential photographers by Outdoor Magazine. Cristina, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
So my first question would be, when did you realize that photography was the perfect intersection for you between passion and skill?
You know, I have this memory of a book launch we did at the Cultural Institute of Mexico in Washington, D.C. And at that time, I was doing a lot of scientific writing.
Okay.
So we had published a beautiful book that had all these incredible scientific data talking about conservation hotspots.
Mm-hmm.
And people were looking at the book and just kind of browsing through the pages, but it was illustrated with beautiful photographs.
Sure.
And it was the first time that I ever published a picture. And when the person that I was with stopped in that picture, he immediately wanted to talk about the photograph. And I thought, isn't that interesting?
Sure.
You know, that he hasn't asked me a single question about all these
The data.
labor. Yeah, I know. And so it became more and more clear that people are more and more inclined to have a conversation about something that's very common to all of us. You know, we all take pictures.
Absolutely. So what does the role of photography do in sensitizing people to issues, and including conservation and wildlife management?
Well, you know, especially when it comes to the ocean, most people will never put on a scuba tank and go diving. And it's our job as storytellers to kind of bring audiences to see these things that they generally don't have access to, and then to introduce it with stories. And, you know, in the old days of natural history storytelling, it was all about the animals and behavior and usually a lot of action, you know, the chase,
Sure.
the kill.
Right.
These days, the story really has to do a lot with the photographer as a character, as a witness in the front lines, and, you know, as a personality that does this kind of adventure. You know, people are very attracted to how it's done, the behind the scenes.
So would you say throughout your history, or throughout your career rather, that storytelling has been one of the main focus points of photography for you?
Yeah. You know, photography is a very, very big discipline, and a lot of it, you know, can be just, it feels like a very two-dimensional slice of time.
Sure.
But when you're a storyteller, you're trying to layer your images with information that give the viewer some context as to what you're trying to say. And the first thing you need to do is to be able to stop people on their tracks.
Okay.
People are so busy and there's so much visual material out there. You want to be putting out photographs that are so beautiful that they make people pause and think and ask questions. And if you're really good at telling stories with your pictures, you often are able to create iconic images that, you know, allow people to internalize the information. So if I say to you, Vietnam, napalm, you know exactly the photograph I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
Those iconic images are the ones that really count.
Okay. You mentioned that your introduction to the career was ethnographic photography, and then it kind of evolved into conservation. What is the difference in methodology with when taking pictures of people in rural areas versus wildlife?
You know, it's actually not very different.
Not very different?
Now that I think about it.
Okay.
Because it's all rooted in respect.
Mm.
And to be able to successfully take pictures of animals, you need to have a lot of patience and a lot of time to allow animals to dictate how they want to interact with you. But it's the same with indigenous people, especially people that are not used to seeing strangers in their villages.
Mm-hmm.
You have to introduce yourself slowly. You never come in barging with cameras. You know, oftentimes you sit there for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, waiting for people to be comfortable or for you to be invited to take your camera out.
Very cool. So how do we as a society distance ourselves from the notion that we should be using the environment as more of a commodity, and how do we kind of come back to our roots and appreciate what it can do and how important it is to our sustainability and how to live with it symbiotically?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. this question of humanity above nature and separate from nature is one that's rooted on Western civilization and religious narrative. And, you see it everywhere in the United States. We are a very me society,
Absolutely.
Me at all costs. When you talk to Indigenous people, I was just with an elder woman from the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation day before yesterday, and she was saying to me, when we see a forest, we don't see just a pile of wood to be made into chopsticks. It's a sacred entity.
Sure.
It's something that's been there for longer than we have. The way that we reconnect is just by trying to find some spirituality in nature, because I feel that the root of a lot of our depression, our anger, our anxiety comes from that separation from nature, and the fact that we know, that when you open the tap, that water is not coming from a tank, it's coming from a river.
Yeah, sure. Could you then go on to talk a little bit about enoughness and how that could play into maybe allowing people to understand the importance of nature and living with less?
Yeah, enoughness has been it's been a very slow motion realization for me that has come from spending time with people that live in very frugal conditions, and we would dub that poverty, but for them they have everything they need, because study after study shows that real happiness doesn't come from stuff, and here in Western society, that's what we're marketed.
Absolutely.
Every commercial ad tells you that unless you have the bigger, the better, the shinier, you're not going to be happy. Whereas for a lot of Indigenous people, being rooted in meaningful work, in family, in community, in pride in your culture and language, and in tradition and spirituality, whatever that is what makes you happy and complete and fulfilled. And it's what allows you to then be able to give back.
Very cool.
But the wonderful thing about enoughness is that we all have it inside us. All you have to do is go look for it. And then once you find it and you start measuring your own output to the world in terms of enoughness, then you are able to give so much more, and so much more that's meaningful.
Absolutely.
And it just fills you up like a cup.
Very cool.
Away goes the depression, away goes the narcissism, all of these things that are suffocating us.
So you're working right now on a book called Amaze. Would you mind telling me what the essence of that project is and what kind of message you'd like to send with it?
Yeah, Amaze is an incredible opportunity to have a retrospective as a photographer. And when I looked at the collection of images, it became clear that it was two big themes. One is enoughness, and all these experiences and all these things that I've seen in Indigenous people and in rural people around the world. And the other one is the water's edge, and that's my other passion. And so the book is divided into these two big narratives, and I'm really proud of the way it's coming along. Comes out in June.
Okay.
And for a photographer, sometimes it's a once in a lifetime to be able to have a retrospective, a monograph of your work. So
there will be a day eventually when you'll be able to pass on the crucible to other people who are wanting to get involved with conservation and environmental sciences. What do you hope your legacy will be when that day comes?
One of the first things that I observed when I came into photography was that there's this cult of the photographer.
Okay.
And it was difficult as a young person and as a woman to kind of break into that world of, the big dinosaurs, the big famous photographers. I have made it my mission throughout my career to not be like that and to do exactly the opposite, to lift everybody that I can along the way and to mentor other people and to build platforms like the International League of Conservation Photographers that invite other people to explore their own narrative as a conservation warrior.
Okay.
And, to me, knowing that there's thousands of photographers out there that are wearing these, it's an invisible spandex suit, the superhero out there to save the world with their pictures, it makes me real proud.
Very cool. Last night in your speech, you mentioned that the biggest threat to the ocean and to the environment as a whole is apathy. It's people not willing to get up and get off the couch and do things that they understand are difficult but necessary and very important. For those people who are not necessarily photographers or adventurers or have the means to do so, how can they help? How can they get involved? What are some instruments that you've made available to people who want to do something?
You know, it's that assumption, right? That surely, I mean, we're in such a mess. You know, our government must be doing something, corporations must be doing something,
Sure.
and it's their realization that they really are not,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to be accountable for our own actions every day. And you know, the place where people get really lazy is understanding what is it that they need to do. And people expect like this magic list of 3 things or 5 or 10 things that they can do every day. And the real job is to educate yourself. You know, where's my food come from? What is my carbon footprint? How do I reduce it? The more you do it, the more aware you become. But you can start with very simple things, you know. And these are things that are difficult to do, but where we have the most impact is in the reduction of our consumption of meat.
Okay.
You know, I'm not going to say that I'm a vegetarian because I'm not, but I eat meat very rarely because it's the highest driver of climate change.
Wow.
And it's something so simple we all can, you know, we can choose the chicken burger instead of the, if that's a big deal.
Conscientiousness.
Exactly.
In everything.
It's just those decisions every day.
Absolutely.
To walk instead of driving, you know, it's the cumulative effect of all our individual actions that has an enormous impact. And the most important thing that we have to do, it's imperative that we do it, is that we become really outspoken about our desire for a better planet. You know, everywhere I go, this is my aspiration. I would love for my children, for you, to grow up in a planet where there's living rhinoceros and elephants.
It's a shame.
And it's a shame, you know, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Not at
But
all.
the only time when the world has changed is when people have stood up to articulate in a very strong manner the kind of place that they want to live in.
Right.
And so that's the most important thing, to declare yourself for Earth.
And that's part of Sea Legacy. That's the realization that 90% of the larger species have been fished or killed.
Wiped out, yeah.
What is the essence of Sea Legacy? What are you trying to do with that?
You know, in the beginning, we were just trying to bring people to see what's happening in the ocean, both the good and the bad. But there's been an evolution of the things that we can actually do. So we've been able to push for the creation of marine protected areas, which has been great. Because a lot of these decisions are made by politicians, and politicians are really, you know, they are really susceptible to the power of public opinion.
Absolutely.
So when you're able to show them that the majority of the public is what they want, very good things happen.
Very cool.
So marine protected areas is one. We're trying to promote the idea of more sustainable fisheries. We really have fished out 90% of the big fish in the ocean. 80% of our fisheries are either collapsed or on the verge of collapse. You know, we keep going at it pretending that we don't know these things. To me, it's shocking. When I was in university in the 1980s, we already knew that these things were happening, and yet, you know, carry on because the power of market is this idea that the economy is an endless thing that needs to grow. It's a fallacy.
Absolutely.
And so
nature is finite, and we cannot keep commodifying it.
You know, when you put the economy and nature pitted against each other, only one is going to get out of the way, and it's not going to be nature.
It's not going to be nature.
Exactly. So the purpose of Sea Legacy is, more importantly, more than anything, to empower young people to have a voice in how we create this change. And it became an interesting journey to start getting first hundreds and then thousands and then millions of followers. When you look at the demographic, it's mostly 18 to 35-year-old people. These are the age of my children. And I know them. I know who these people are, and I know they're scared, and I know they're angry. And I know they want to be able to have some power over what's going on. And one way of having power is to put our voices together. And so we create these campaigns. We're very lucky that we have a product team that creates you know, very easy to navigate landing pages. Push this button and you'll tweet to the Prime Minister, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a very simple action. But the most important part of it is to be able to take the loop around and show you that your small action had a huge impact. Because that will, you know,
it'll reverberate and make people want to do more and more.
Exactly.
And more.
You're gonna, I want to do that again.
Very cool.
And so our job is to find where those tipping points are, and there's lots of them.
Well, last question. From the start of your career until now, would you say that you're more or less optimistic about the trajectory of where we're going with environmentalism? I understand that the current political landscape is not very conducive to what you've worked so hard to achieve and restore and reserve. However, lots of the younger people are online and they're using media to get their voices heard, and you're doing such a great job of amplifying those voices. It's difficult, I'm sure, to respond to.
No, I mean, it's two things. I mean, I've lived long enough to see some of these political,
Sure.
back and forth.
Okay.
And the one thing you learn is that whenever the pendulum goes way too far on one side, it will come swinging right back to the other side.
Okay.
And our job is to be ready to act when that pendulum swings. So what's happening in the United States now is just it's creating the base that's going to be able to react to that pendulum swing. Because when it happens, we're going to be able to restore the EPA. We're going to be able to restore national monuments and national parks. We're going to be able to rebuild the regulations for a third industrial revolution. Say, in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we really have to transition to renewable energy. Transitions are never easy. They're never fast, but this is already happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's irreversible. We have to go this way.
Yep.
And, fossil fuels are finite. Renewable energy is not.
Right. Well, I really want to thank you for joining me today. I appreciate the company, and thank you for answering those questions. Thank you for those who joined me at home. Please check out Amaze. It's coming out in June. Check out Sea Legacy. We'll put the link in the end of the credits.
Become a member of the Tide.
Become a member of the Tide. Make a difference. Stand at the water's edge. Thank you very much.
Thank you.